opens the game with one h4. There we go. It's freestyle chess, and Magnus has this simple rule. Whenever the rook is behind the h pawn here in freestyle chess, you push it. It's generally a good idea. The king, rook, bishops, knight, and queen. This is how it is. This is the battle between Sweden number 1, Nils, and Norway number 1, Magnus. Of course, Magnus is not limited to being number 1 in Norway. He's also the number 1 player in the world. e5 played here, and Magnus pushing his h pawn down the board. In a normal game of chess, in our standard position, this would have been a fatal idea, giving black a very nice position. But in freestyle chess, this looks pretty good. h6 by Nils, stopping the pawn from moving ahead. And now, what is Magnus's next move going to be? He pushes his pawn to b4. Very bold moves by Magnus there. He attacks the e5 pawn, opening up his queen. He still has to think about his bishops in the center of the board. He'll do so, but first the e5 pawn has to be taken care of, and d6 played here by Nils. a4 by Magnus played, gaining space on the queen side. It's a very interesting play here by Magnus Carlsen. He's just moving his pawns, he's gaining space, and I think Nils will now do well to develop a piece. He goes knight d7. Maybe the idea that black can go for here is f5, unleashing his bishop on this pawn, knight f6, again attacking this pawn, and this h5 pawn could very well become a bit weak. Magnus now pushes another pawn with c4, and perhaps it's the best move in the position. Grandelius comes back, and I think his move also makes a lot of sense, gaining space in the center of the board. Somehow do feel that black's position looks more compact and to the point, while white seems to have played in a little bit more free-flowing manner. Knight comes to c3. He brings his knight out, and Magnus is willing to put his knight into the center. His c pawn is a bit soft right now, but it can be defended by d3. Let's see what Nils does. He goes bishop f7, the best move in the position, attacking the pawn on c4. And Magnus now has to decide what his plan is going to be here. Goes for d3, defending the pawn on c4. The way in which black can really put a lot of pressure perhaps is with rook e8 and e4 break, if that could come up. But he goes c6, which is also a fine move. Two things here. One is that he could pop out the bishop on this diagonal if needed. The other is he bolsters the center. e3 played here by Magnus. Pushes his pawn further ahead a bit. Pawn to e3. And now a5 played here by Grandelius. Just gaining some space on the queen side. And now b5 played here by Magnus Carlsen. It does give black the c5 square, also the b6 square. And Nils does put his bishop on this diagonal with bishop to b6. Very difficult to assess who's better here. Black is surely struggling with his queen's position on a8. But apart from that, his position looks pretty okay. Bishop e2 by Magnus. Just a slow developing move. And now the knight comes out to e7. Black's position looks very coordinated for the time being. Also, the queen can now enter in, queen e8 if needed. Magnus plays his knight to b3. He does find a small chink in black's armor. Maybe the a5 pawn could be a potential weakness there. And Nils plays next, knight c5. Maybe not the best move here, because I guess better ideas were rook e8 somehow. But knight c5, what he's done with this is he's trading one of white's not so active pieces, the knight on b3, for his very good knight on d7, which could have potentially gone to f6. So takes on c5. Bishop takes c5. And now Magnus brings his queen to d1. Well, just defending the pawn on h5, also improving the position of the queen. Queen a7 here by Nils. And he's putting pressure on the e3 pawn, because let's say bishop e3, f e3, queen e3 could become a possible tactic at some point. And rook h4 by Magnus. Well, queen d1 also had an idea to push forward with d4. He stopped it with queen a7, and now rook h4 renews the threat of d4. Very interesting. And bishop drops back to b6. So if you do plan to play d4 now, it doesn't hit the bishop, and then black can just realign with rook d8. Magnus does play d4. Wow, it's on the board. And now pushing your pawn to e4 may not be a great idea, because then white is seriously better with h3. So he goes rook d8, the best move, keeping flexibility in the position. If you notice white's position, he's already castled here. King is on g1. He's got his rook activated. For black, maybe the way to activate his rooks would be to castle short and bring the rook to f8. ef. Sorry, de, de. The queen is attacked now on d1. Magnus plays the queen to c2. And I guess it's time now to short castle for black, because the rook on h8 isn't doing much. And so you can see he short castles here, presses the clock. Players are still a little bit apprehensive when they're castling, just to look at their opponent and see if what they're doing is right or not. And by the way, Magnus goes for another of his typical maneuvers. Knight b1 with the idea of knight d2, knight b3 or knight f3. He's going with his knight. And f4, what a classy move here by Nils. And his point is, after takes, he wants to just play his bishop here, and after takes, knight f5, you can see the bishop activated, rook activated, knight hitting here. Magnus is like, I'm having nothing of that sort. I'm pushing my pawn, I'm letting you keep your pawn here. And now you can see the d4 square has been weakened, and Nils just drops his bishop into that square. Fantastic move. Bishop d4 played here by the Swedish number 1. And Magnus now brings his knight to d2. I like black's position a lot now, because if you see, every piece has a role in the position. c5. Bolstering the bishop in the center of the board. The bishop is very strong on this diagonal as well. Knight to f3 played. The knight is looking at the d4 bishop and the e5 pawn. And b6 played here. So nice move by Nils. controlling the a5 pawn. And Magnus brings his bishop to c3, just understands which pieces need to be traded. I think he's looking to exchange here on d4. And again, a good move by Grandelius. He brings his queen to c7. The idea is if you take on d4, you want to take ed4, you want to push e5 in the right moment. And if cd4, you want to push c5. So that's the reason why you can see Magnus is bringing his rook to c1, so that later he can get that going. g5, wow, that's a bold move by Grandelius there. He pushes his pawn to g5. Shut Magnus there. H takes g6 and now takes with the knight. Is he giving up his h pawn, h6 pawn? Can we simply take it? Or it's a threat? Oh my god, look at this idea. King g7, you move back and it's black who takes the h file. This is the creativity of Grandelius, which is so amazing. Magnus goes rook h5. He's like, I don't want that pawn, Nils. I know how tricky you are. I've been seeing you for years. This is what you are good at. I'm not falling for it. But now black's position looks really good. King g7, bringing the king one square up, defending the h6 pawn. Yes, he plays it. King g7 on the board. And look at the times on the clock. Magnus has 31 minutes. Nils has 12 minutes. Magnus takes on d4. And he takes with the e pawn. Interesting, because after c pawn takes, maybe he was afraid that c5 could come in. So that's the reason why he takes here. And also makes a square for his knight later to come to e5. e5 pushed through by Magnus Carlsen. Whoa! That's a great move. He opens up the queen. And imagine if a queen comes to e4, bishop to d3, that would be something. He brings his knight to e7, attacks the rook here on h5. The position is equal. And Magnus's rook is attacked. Nils down to 6 minutes on the clock. Time does play a crucial role in such games. Rook h4 played, attacking the pawn on f4. Now you have to save it. Do something about it. And I guess the most logical move now is knight g6, attacking the rook and the pawn. Magnus thinks for a bit. He's a bit unsure. He plays his rook again to h5. Very quickly repeated by Nils Grandelius. Maybe it was not needed to repeat, but he did it. And I think the players, both of them, are they happy with the splitting of the point? Not so sure. If Magnus wants that, if Nils wants that, maybe Nils, the way in which he played knight e7, it did look he was happy. Rook h1 played. Now notice the rook is here. Now an important move here is to make sure that if the knight moves, the queen doesn't come to f5. So bishop g6 can be a good idea here. But what a blunder here by Nils Grandelius. Last time he was hitting the rook. This time there is no rook. And with 5 minutes 48 seconds, he's blundered big time. Why? Because he's allowed Magnus to come into f5. Magnus Carlsen comes to the board with a glass of water. Will he be able to find queen f5? The reason why queen f5 is super strong is because he's threatening a check. And if that is protected, the queen moves to h5, threatening a mate here on h6. So look at this, queen f5. If queen e7, just come in here. And it's over. Bishop here, the bishop comes to d3. And then it's a huge attack that's brewing. And he finds it. Queen f5 on the board. Beautiful move. And Nils is shocked because bishop takes c4, unleashes an attack on the queen. But queen h5, if bishop e2, I take here and I simply snatch your queen. That's the point. And he plays here, bishop takes c4. Magnus plays queen h5. He finds this variation. Bishop e2, Nils is going for it. He's like, Magnus, I'm taking your piece. What do you have? Magnus takes on h6. He's calculated all of it. King goes to g8. Yes, that's a better move because if king f7, we just saw, you drop your queen. So king g8 played, but now your knight is falling. And Magnus is like, okay, I'm taking this knight. Queen takes g6. Queen comes to g7, blocking the queen. And now there is queen e6 check. A very, very important move here. Finds it. Queen e6 check on the board. And now it has to be blocked somehow. Queen f7, rook f7. He plays rook f7. And now there's a very, very insanely strong move, which is rook h6 with the idea of rook d6. And Magnus finds it. Rook h6 on the board. Super strong move. Threatening rook g6. And now bishop d3 played. Queen takes on b6. And rook jumps to f8 because the rook was hanging. If you see now, white is a pawn up, and also the black king is in shambles right now. But how to finish him off? Do we snatch another pawn here? Magnus says, why not? Rook takes c5 on the board, and Carlsen has like 8 minutes 15 seconds. Nils is down to last 30 seconds. He could very well resign here, but bishop e4 played, attacking the knight. One of the things that Magnus does incredibly well, rook c6. Oof, what a move, by the way. What a move. Because now the threat is really rook g6, bishop g6, rook g6, which is winning. So if you take here, he goes rook b7. But if you take here, bishop takes, then queen c6, and then just push the b pawn down the board. So he goes rook b7. He takes the pawn on d4. And now bishop takes on c6. I believe the best move is to take with the rook now. Rook takes c6. Oh, he's making an intermezzo. Oh, queen c4. Wow. That is some alertness of next level. He's actually going to take this with the queen. Wow. Queen f7 played. And now queen takes on c6. What? e6? Magnus is like, I'm going to just win your house. I'm going to win your house completely. Queen g7 played. e7 check. So clinical. So clinical. Rook f7. And you can't queen here, which you would love to because the bishop's there. So why not snatch the bishop now? Takes it. And now the rook is hanging. Rook g6 is threatened. The queen is threatened. There's too many things happening here. And it is game over. He goes for a check on a1 just to get his queen out of harm's way from rook g6. Magnus plays his king to h2. And now, yes, the logical move to take the pawn. Is there a mate now? That's the question. Does Magnus have a mate somewhere? Is queen c8 check the best move? Is queen g6 check a move? He finds queen c8. And after rook f8, aha, the move that could be super strong here is queen g4 check. And of course, if queen g7, there is rook g6 winning the game. It's the end of the game. So rook g7 makes a lot of sense. And he plays it, rook g7. And Magnus now has a great move, queen e6 check. Amazing how Magnus sees all these patterns so rapidly. Rook f7. And is it time to get the knight into the game now? The rook and queen are working overtime. The knight comes in and says, guys, relax. It's the win is in the bag now. Knight e5 attacking the f7 pawn. There's a pin here. f3 played by Grandelius, hoping for some final fireworks if rook g2 comes in or if takes queen g1 check. But those things aren't going to happen now. Magnus is switched in, he's switched on. He will find the winning move, knight g6. What a move. The threat is queen e8 check. The threat is rook h8 mate. Too many threats here. I believe it's time to throw in the towel here. Nils Grandelius played really well until the major part of the game. But once he made those knight maneuvers without much thought, Magnus Carlsen got a winning opportunity and he grabbed it with both his hands, a handshake and resignation with a smile on the face. Magnus is relieved with this victory. He moves to 3 out of 3. It's not an easy tournament. He had to play 2 games in a day.